Hey, what's up, viewer? Welcome back to this Nebulous live development series. This is day 7, hour 2, and still meeting the emotional pressure for getting this UI work done. It's disappointing that it strikes, but I'm pretty sure it just has something to do with the fact that despite how hard I work, I don't have anything to show for it, financially speaking. So my hope and goal is that once I can eclipse that particular barrier in my life, I'll have much better resonance for approaching this problem solving. For that though, I'm going to have to continue working on the game, and I'm going to have to continue trying to make the best game that I can. That way people have something they can care about through the game. Alright, so without any further ado, I'm going to get started here. I discovered one issue, which is that if I enter play mode, I've screwed up the buttons somehow and they do not actually click. These do, but these do not, and part of that's because I broke something in them, which is that I changed their base color, which means that I effectively busted their responsiveness. So to fix that, I have to do something which, to a certain extent, I forgot how to do. So I'm going to have to jump here into my project and go back to an older scene. I think the start screen had it. And I defined specific values for start and exit. And perhaps they're in the style sheet, perhaps they're in the visual tree. I think it's a combination of them. So I'm going to open up the visual tree. And if I take a look, there is a start screen. And I simply have a start and a start hover pair here. So start has a background color of green, and then start hover has a darker background color. So I can fix the button responsiveness by adding those. That's pretty grotesque though, because I have to have one for every single button apparently. So it's a little unfortunate. If I can pseudonize them well, I do believe that it will, if I use the proper like CSS selectors or whatever, it'll be easier. But I don't remember exactly how to do that very good, so I am considering just leaving it for now. Alright. So there's a few things here. Man, like this basically came together pretty good. This isn't doing so bad, but for some reason this is just irking me. Okay, so I've figured out a way to add some values, and I can add up to 12 values. However, most of those values aren't actually going to matter yet because the ships aren't researchable just quite yet. So the testable values will actually be down in the infrastructure values, in the investment values probably. There's of course a lot of room for expansion. The other thing I was wanting to do is maybe change the color scheme. Which might be an easy way to add some sharpness, but I just don't know if I'm going to be able to get around the buttons not being responsive. I might be able to though. Okay, so another thing I'm trying to accomplish here is I would like to... The other thing I was going to do is I was actually just going to change this to say just damage. and so on and so forth down the way here. Range is ambiguous, I suppose, because it could be like there could be different weapons with different ranges or something. Alright, so let's see here. So now I'm looking at essentially, yeah, I mean, effectively what I'm going to do is duplicate row 1 into these other rows. And this will provide a complete group of options, and I'll just have to run through here and change their labels. Okay, and I have to decide what they are as well. So here's weapon damage. So there's damage, range, rate of fire. I guess there's weapon tracking, which is ship specific and design specific, because certain ships might not have weapon tracking. Alright, and then are those the main ones? Damage, rate of fire, range, and tracking. I think those are the main ones for that. So now let's say like shield size. Shield capacity. I'll change this to match that semantic. Shield capacity, I'll change this one to shield recharge, maybe shield regeneration. Since this is the 7th day of doing the work, I would like to post a week-long update, or I'd like to post an update for the week by effectively trying to complete the research system to a point where I can test it through the game, so I can show off scanning, investment, and research. That would be nice to throw out into the ethers. Okay, so now we've got shield. What was this going to be? Shield recharge? Shield recharge. We'll keep it simple and say shield recharge. And then from here we've got where is this even at? Way out of position. Okay, so weapon tracking, shield capacity, shield recharge, row 2. And then row 3 we've got, what other values did I come up with? I came up with, so there's warp speed, warp calculate, or warp spool up is more correct, but I don't have a good name for that. Warp charge, maybe? Warp something. But those two, so the 2 warp values, then we have 2 subspace values for thrust and rotation. So there's 4. And then there's capacitor. And that completely skips like a bazillion other ones that potentially could go in there. Like there could be other values. I guess I'm bumping the scanning values down to infrastructure. So if the ship has a scanner, it would get buffed globally. The other thing would be like some kind of crew value. So like maybe an upkeep value on the ship, or some kind of, there's also like the idea of having boarding parties and stuff. And there's also ship values for orbital capacity and building and cargo and stuff, but I might leave that under infrastructure values. If that, I'm going to have to bump the range up of this, so I'm not sure. But I know I want a lot of these different types of values. So let's come in here and we'll say capacitor. And capacity is lame, so capacitor size. And there's capacitor recharge. So let's see your capacitor size. Even though capacity is a little bit more accurate, here's capacitor recharge, which is a value the player has access to. Once they can control a ship, the ship will... It would be really cool to have the player, like, be able to delegate, or it would be cool if the player could, like, divert power from the capacitor. So everything has, like, a base capacitor read, but, like, if the player wanted to, like, push things past their limits, the idea would be that they could, like, yank the power from other places in the ship and maybe, like, you know, like, spool... Okay, so effectively, if the weapons in the shield and the navigation systems are all engaged at once, effectively the capacitor would have to, like, be giving power to all of them. However, if the player deemed it necessary to divert power from the weapons to the shields, and essentially what would happen is the shields would gain buffs, but the weapons would lose their ability to fire without being resequenced with power. So it kind of, like, would require a... Like, the weapons would... You couldn't just... Essentially, the weapons would have to be refed the power over a couple seconds as kind of a drawback to withdrawing the power. Or something like that. And the player can... It would effectively feel like they're, like, kind of at the helm of the ship, because they would be able to push certain systems past their limits strategically, and it just creates a ton of potential player decision, which of course, like everything else, the player doesn't have to play the game like that. So I suppose those capacitor values are fine for now. Alright, so now we're down here. Capacitor. So I guess we could say just what engine thrust. And then here we would have, this is row 4 now, so let's close these elements up. So engine thrust. Man, I don't know what to call this. Rotation power? It's a little lame. I guess I could just call it rotation thrust, perhaps. Okay, so now we've got forward power, engine power, and then turning left and right engine power with rotation thrust. And we've also got... better rename this to thrust. Not thirst thrust. What were the last two going to be? They were going to be warp stuff. So warp speed. Oops. This have this is like warp charge. Or I would like to call it warp. I mean, warp charge makes some sense. Warp prime perhaps makes some sense. Warp buildup. Warp calculate warp engage time, maybe. Warp initiate. And warp spool up. And I think I was using warp calculate the other day. So that's like a warp drive that can jump into warp very quickly, more or less. There may wind up being like another row or two of these values anyway. So the main one would be ship displacement is one that's important. I could add the scanning ranges. Just from one row alone, we've got displacement and scan ranges, but and there could even be possibly one more after that for certain other capacities like logistical stuff or a boarding party or something like that, but I have to come up with a name for this. So warp speed makes sense, that's how fast the ship warps, but how fast the ship enters warp? So like warp launch, warp initialize, warp initiate. So like warp initiation. It's just not, it doesn't roll off the tongue well. It almost fits. I could say like warp init time. Warp initiation time. Warp countdown, warp. How about like I could say like warp charge. Warp charge up. Maybe. Warp launch. Warp something, that's for sure. Warp charge up, warp spool up, warp engagement? Warp engage time, maybe? That one fits, basically. Warp engage time. Okay, we'll go with that for now. Write it in here. And I functionally have all of these going on except for the problem of them having the buttons screwed up. So besides for that part, they're looking so bad. So here's the issue. If I grab one of these buttons like this, it only has a button. Man, I would literally have to tag in the CSS like 4, 8, 12, 24 buttons plus these just to set their hover tag. And I don't really want to. So instead I could grab basically I could grab the research values and then like say like all of its children buttons. Oh, that's not gonna work though. Yeah, it's just weird that it breaks the responsiveness is all. Man, okay, so there's just nothing else I can do. I'm just gonna have to very manually come through here and change these. And I'm gonna have to do that I'm just gonna have to do that very plainly here. And then once I name them all manually, I basically have to fix their stuff up here. Man, that is just not cool. Alright, so let me name this. I guess this is the weapon damage. What did I call this down here? Clear? Weapon damage clear investment. And then here it's weapon damage. Oh, okay. So I just had an idea pop in my head. If I call this clear investment, and I spell it correctly, of course, and I call this one invest, and then I come up here and I have to add a selector here. So I'm going to close this really quick in case it asks me to route something. And then to create a new USS, and I'm just going to plug it into game UI. And the file is just going to be called I'm just going to let UI script. I guess I could have renamed it game UI to match the other one. Alright, so I have this. I'm going to remove this one and add an existing one, which is just the one I just created. And now under this USS, I have to add a selector. And you can, in fact, select a child at any depth. And I'm not trying to change every single button on the whole screen. I'm just trying to change the buttons. Style class name. Sorry, I just don't use this very often. So these things are just need to say something like this. And there is a style class, which I could effectively add to the button. I just don't remember how to. Oh, yellow is a style class. Alright, so if I wanted to fix the responsiveness, I would have to come in here and somehow change every single button to be a color by default, and then a slightly different color of the same shade when it's hovered, which means I have to do that for every button. So 4, 8, 12, 16, what was it, 24, 48? I mean, there's going to be a ton. But for now, I'm just not going to do it. I'll fix the responsiveness later on, and for now, if it will let me bring this up here, of course. I am just going to run the buttons. However, as I was suggesting, none of these actually matter right now. So I probably am going to need to jump down here and more or less add more buttons or more options like this. And this is getting into a lot of design decisions. This is getting into it really is just getting into like all the different ways, or all the different things the planets can do. So it's like, whatever the planet can do, effectively this has the ability to buff on a global level, but I don't have every single thing figured out just quite yet for that. So like over here we've got some obvious ones, but there are a couple that are not fleshed out yet. So I guess for now the idea would be to maybe add a row of these. Just enough to show off the research system actually buffing these values would probably be what's up for this. So if I were to do that, I would come in here and let's click on this for instance. We've got row 1 through 4 ship research values. So I'm going to duplicate ship research values. And I basically just need to move these underneath this infrastructure label. And I filled out another section here. And it looks like it's a little intricate at least. Problem is that these 3 rows I don't need yet. So like I yank these here, then I hope it's clear that they can expand, but I'm not sure if it's clear or not. But effectively, the idea would be that all I have to do is copy these values down. Which, of course, I'm getting into the idea of having a, like an array of all the names. And then from that, propagate down the UI, but, excuse me. Propagate down the UI in that regard, but I have not ever done it like that. I would have to practice building the UI properly using code. So I'm not going to do that at this exact instant. Instead, I'm going to continue focusing on developing mechanics. Alright, so this is no longer, oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. So this is now called, this is economy, basically. And in this instance, it's assumed that these values are synonymous with scanning values on a ship, but it hasn't been stipulated yet. This one's scanning frequency, but the name is, I think it's too large. So I need to go like this, basically. And more or less, this is no different than the investment panel. Functionally speaking, the player just clicks a button to add or remove this to investments. Under the hood, it's a little different. For basically each, so the player data is going to need all of these values. And whatever this percentage is, on each of these, there's going to be a percentage in the player data. And then any ship value in the game, or any infrastructure value in the game, that uses these stats has to make sure to multiply in this percentage, is effectively how this works. Alright, so I'm considering how to do this exactly. Probably going to need a mono behavior and then just name it research investment panel. Give me 1 second, I gotta mute this microphone. Alright, sorry about that. Hopefully there won't be too much noise going on. Alright, and once this mono behavior is created, it is almost a carbon copy of this thing. It's practically the same principle. So I suppose I'm going to probably just need to do that next. Let's minimize this builder here, and then we will go to document, and more or less I'm just generating a new component like this one. At this point it's going to be, what do I call it over here? Elements. So I've got this research investment elements class, model behavior, and we're inevitably going to have to use its start function to initialize all of its values. If it will, of course, not lag on me here. Which it seems to be inclined. Okay, there we go. It was inclined to lag on me for a second. So, undoubtedly, we're just going to need a visual element root. I'll have to include the UI elements, and then root equals get component UI document root visual element. And now we have a root for querying. So here's where we're going to get into like a bazillion different button references, more or less. There's going to need to be I'm actually going to open up the other element because it is very similar in functionality. Alright, and the plan was, I'm pretty sure the plan was for me to, like, okay, so the plan was for this button, for instance, to be called a clear investment. Okay, so this is throwing me off. Alright, so essentially I could gather a child element called this, and then grab this element's child economy element, and then grab that child clear investment element. And I wouldn't have to write a new name on each of these. I could just say clear investment. However, if I were to do it like that, it would have made sense to name all of these the same. However, I did not. So instead I could just say investment, research, clear investment. And I could just do the rote thing. But I would like to test if I can query the elements properly. So for that I'm going to give this a shot here. So clear investment is not good enough. There's going to be multiple elements returned. And just to make sure that's the case, I'm going to rename these. Oops. And then from this point we will... I'm just going to have to figure out how to do this query. Oh, it needs to be called infrastructure. My bad. Infrastructure. Okay, so if I can query for the research, or I can query for the infrastructure research values, would be the first thing to do. So visual element. Then from here we can say something like infrastructure research values dot children and the idea would be to I don't want to just grab all of its children. That's not what I'm interested in doing. So let me see if I can say, I was under the impression that's how it worked. Alright, so that's giving me the impression that I actually cannot query throughout the hierarchy. I can only grab direct descendants. So I suppose the easy thing would be to say something like children, and then the children can get queried. Oh no, it's not even letting me do that. Can I say like, do I go like this for as a property, or? No, it just works like this. Man, okay, so that's not exactly as I was expecting it to work, so I'm going to have to Google this to some degree here. And I'm going to have to say like Unity 3D traverse root element, perhaps. I was just looking at this and it gave me a little bit of an answer somewhere down here. Man, like, when I'm on a strict deadline like this, where I, like, am running out of time, financially speaking, to be able to do this kind of thing, learning a whole new thing is just not cool. So the idea comes to mind to, like, just force it in some way that I know how to make it work, instead of try to get intelligent with it, because it doesn't feel very good having to like trial and errors a bunch of stuff when that's the last thing I need to be doing. I need results, not more things to learn. So that being said, I suppose essentially what it was suggesting was I can't write a queue like this. I have to make it I basically have to make it a query. And in this instance, it was like, it wasn't letting me grab the children. It wasn't letting me put a string in here. So what if I query here for something? Can I say children here? Nope, not quite. Okay, so it's effectively saying it wants me to use the more traditional query option, which I am not as familiar with, to be honest. And I know I'm looking for a button. And the button's name is Clear Investment. And here's a children grab thing. There's a descendants option also. Okay, so there's some interesting stuff in there. And from here I can just see if this is working or not, more or less. So I'm going to run the debugger real fast and take a look at exactly what's going on here. It might take a split second to recompile now that it's in the debugger mode. And I need to, okay, there was one other thing I needed to do. And to add the research investment elements to this. And that should be enough to trigger the debugger on start. Alright, so this visual element is accurate. This button is null. And it did grab a button here properly. Is there a way to see what its parent is, though? Okay, so not quite, but what I can do is do something a little different. I can, so int total, I'll just say int count, whatever. And then infrastructure research values dot query for a button called clear investment. And out of curiosity, is there a way to get a count of them or something? Wait, is this work to list? Yeah, I guess so. I can just say count. And we can see just how many options are queried from infrastructure research values. There should be like at least 3 from that alone. But I think I'm on the right track here. By doing the queries like this, it's like hopefully faster, but it might not be. It might actually be slower using the queries, and I might have been faster manualizing them all, but let's see here. So that it grab 3. So infrastructure research can grab all of the buttons called clear investment, and they do almost the same thing, but not quite exactly the same thing, huh? However, I was able to traverse beyond its direct descendants. So I have the impression that I could query a specific visual element and then query that again for this button. Alright, so my apologies for messing around with this. I'm devising trying to do this a little smarter and let the code do some of the assignment work for me. So I have to sit here and think about it for a second. There's potential to do a function, because more or less the button query part is like specific to the functionality is the same, but what it affects in memory makes it a little different. The other idea would be this would make a change easier in the long run. Alright, so let's just give this a shot here. So let me bust open my UI builder to double check the name of some of the stuff. I think it was just infrastructure research values. So the element I don't care about, this is what I care about, is infrastructure research values. And then from infrastructure research values, there are 3 specific elements at this point, named economy, scanning range, and scanning frequency. So visual elements, or we'll call this economy, accurate enough, are querying for a visual element called economy. Oh no, we're not querying from the root, we're querying from here, aren't we? And then from here, out of curiosity, can we do another query? Or what? Let me see if I can do this or not. And then we can say test.style.color equals color.red. And let's just see if it grabbed the proper element turnout here. Alright, so on play mode, our button should turn red. Basically. Okay, so it basically worked. I accidentally changed the text color, not the background color, but still. It's only... Okay, so this is actually correct. So this almost yields to a button. Or it almost yields to a function. Man, if I had a real comp sci, I could tell if I could, like... I could remember if this nuance is faster or not doing the query like this. Alright, so if I did a function, I mean, I guess there's a few options for doing a function here. If I write some kind of function here, so like void set clear investment button, for instance. This is going to need a string for the research type. It could probably use a string for the research category. And more or less, this just winds up being we're querying for a research category here. Then from here we've got, we do in fact have a button, and that is in fact values.queried for a visual element called research type, and then that is queried again for the actual button, the clear investment button. But here's the kicker. The next thing we have to do is more or less say button.clicked plus equals a lambda function that takes the button. Oh, it does more than that, actually. Okay, so it's going to need, at the end of the day, it's probably going to need our trusty player data value. And then within here, we've got the button setting up to do, I'm trying to consider, it's basically our player data has that list of investments. And in this instance, though, Man, okay, so this is... Alright, I'm probably going to just cut the video for now. I'm going to have to think about this for a second. The other system used components, so that any selection was actually just passing components around. However, because the research system isn't specific like that, it can just have essentially all of the values in player data. Which means I really got to consider, I actually have to reconsider how I'm going to organize this, so once again, I really apologize that I, despite my effort, haven't really managed to push this out. Like, in most of the videos before this, I was pushing out like 2 or 3 or 4 things every video, and now I've like been stuck on the same thing for like a couple of videos, so I really apologize for that. I'm still going to keep working on it though. The game is slowly but surely coming together. I already have an acting model for this tech system. It's this infrastructure system. It already works. I just got to sort out 1 or 2 things. And then once I basically get a couple test values running, it's like all it really comes down to after that is like designing the systems that go in here and then making sure I plug all the values in at the right times. And that's essentially all I gotta do. And the research for the game will effectively be done. The only other thing that could get added at some point would be, my idea is to essentially give like each of these a rare crystal or something, or gas or something, some kind of rare resource that you scan down that can accelerate that stat in particular. And that would essentially allow the player to like accelerate certain things depending on whichever random resources they're given. So that's a way to give the player like a vast amount of decisions, but also help them make that decision depending on what resources they're given randomly. And then if they don't want to invest in whatever they've been blessed with, they can actually use like the diplomacy window to trade stuff. And the idea would be that they could trade like get the resources they want through trade or something like that. And so it's got a lot of work to go, but slowly but surely I'm getting it done. So I appreciate it if you've watched the video this far. I'm going to cut it though, it's a couple minutes over. So I'll see you in the next one. Take care.